my name is Hannah McKinney, and I am from the state of Georgia. I'm going to be pulling up our PowerPoint while everyone else introduces themselves.
My name is Catherine Clark, and I'm from New Jersey.
I'm Sherry Newton, and I'm from Indiana.
And I'm Bethany Soloff, and I'm also from Georgia.
We replicated a study of increasing steps through reinforcement contingency. The purpose of our project was to increase physical activity through walking. Andrade, Berry, Litt, and Petrie tell us that physical inactivity is a high risk factor for mortality throughout the world. It's estimated that less than 5% of Americans meet the healthy guideline for physical activity. The minimum requirement of steps per day, if you want to be meeting the healthy activity, is 10,000 steps per day. Low levels of physical activity in the U.S. are attributed to things like driving cars to work and not walking as much in our daily lives. We have sedentary pursuits such as video games and things like that. And people just aren't as physically active as they used to be, according to Bassett, Wyatt, Thompson, Peters, and Hill. There's a worldwide call to improve our health by increasing our physical activity. Walking is a great way to meet our need for this physical activity. Electronic pedometers provide accurate, objective, and minimal cost methods for measuring our walking activity, according to Bassett Jr. Studies have found that self-management provided by the electronic pedometer is useful for increasing our physical activity, and it's operant in nature and can be addressed using behavior change techniques. Frequency and duration of physical activity can be monitored, as well as delivery of reinforcers for criterion that are met, according to Washington. Studies show that interventions providing tangible reinforcers contingent on our physical activity can increase that activity. So I'm going to give you a review of Curdy and Dallery, the study that we replicated. Curdy and Dallery found that adults participate more often if the physical activity is inexpensive, if it's home-based and it's easy to access, and if it gives you flexibility and time, like you can do it whenever it's convenient for you. Contingency management is evidence-based treatment to measure a target behavior. And in contingency-based management, participants earn preferred items or activities when they meet the certain criterion. These interventions require target behaviors to be easily detectable, reinforcement contingent on our target behaviors, and reinforcements withheld if we don't meet our target goals. In the original study, we replicated, which is internet-based contingency management increases walking in sedentary adults by A.N. Curdy and J. Dallery. This study attempted to increase physical activity through walking, and the original participants were men and women. They were all over the age of 50, and they were required to walk 6,000 steps or less during their baseline time in order to qualify for the study. The participants were divided into two groups, Group 1 and Group 2. Group 1 received monetary reinforcement for meeting their goals, and Group 2 did not receive any monetary reinforcement when they met their goals. In the original study by Curdy and Dallery, they wore Fitbits to record their daily steps, and they wore those Fitbits. They put them on every morning when they got up, and they wore them until they went to bed at night, except for any kind of water activities. The daily steps were recorded or uploaded to a website where the researchers were able to track their data. They used a changing criterion design, and they increased their steps by 1,000 steps when they met their goals for each criterion. They had to meet those goals for 3 out of 5 days. The study was concluded for the participants, or each participant, as they met 10,000 steps on 3 of 5 days during their criterion goal. In Curdy, Group 1 All 6 participants reached their goals, excuse me, during the intervention, and they received their monetary consequences. The participants in group 1 improved their steps 80 to 256% over their baseline averages. In group 2, they did not receive monetary consequences for meeting their goals, yet they improved their steps 8 to 186% over their baseline averages. Group 1 increased their steps by a greater percentage than group 2. And this study by Curdy and Dallery shows that the internet-based interventions using goal setting with and without monetary consequences increased walking in adults.
All right, so I'm going to go over the replication of our study that we did. So there were 4 participants in our study, ranges from 24 to 55 years old. We all collected our steps every day using an Apple Watch. And Apple Watch, so every morning we put on our Apple Watch, and then we went throughout our day and everything. And then at the end of the day, we would put our Apple Watch like on the charger or whatever, and we would take like a screenshot of our daily steps that we did each day. We would share those daily steps on a Google document, Google Docs, with everyone in the group. We also had a pedometer that we used. We got the pedometers at like Walmart, and we used those for taking IOA. And some people had like some complications with that. But for the most part, we all used that to take IOA. And so our design that we used was changing criterion design. And we would pretty much every 1,000 steps, we were able to increase to the next criterion. So for example, in baseline, we would have an average, and to continue on to the next criterion, we would it would have to average out to 1,000 steps. The 3 highest days would have to average out to 1,000 steps, and then we were able to move on to criterion, like the next criterion. And then also the study did not end with a participant reaching 10,000 steps out of the 3 to 5 days. And then I'm going to keep going over the replication of the study. And so in group 1, that was me and Catherine. We earned rewards if we met the goal, which was 1,000 steps each week. Participants in group 2, which was Hannah and Sherry, they did not get the rewards, pretty much reinforcement. During the whole entire during the whole entire treatment, everyone increased their steps during the treatment, like all 4 of us did. The participants in group 1 improved their steps by 24 to 31% over the baseline averages. And then in group 2, it was 46%. So group 2 increased their steps by a greater percentage than group 1. So, yeah. And then I'm going to talk about the behavior definition. So our behavior definition was to increase daily steps by walking or increasing with an Apple Watch worn on your wrist to track movement, step movement. So an example would be typical daily walking, such as 1 foot in front of the other, or exercising with some kind of exercising with an Apple Watch on. A non-example would be daily walking or exercising without an Apple Watch on. Now I'm going to go over the materials that we used. So materials that we used, of course, we had an Apple Watch. The Apple Watch recorded the steps, and it synced to your iPhone, which we all had, and that was how we were able to take screenshots and send to each other. We also have an iPhone camera, which is the way we're able to screenshot the data. We also had chargers for both Apple Watches and the iPhone. So Apple Watches at night, we were able to charge our Apple Watch, and then the next day we were able to put it back on and keep going. And then iPhone, we also charged that at night as well. So we also had a pedometer. I talked about this for the IOA purposes. So that was to record our steps. We also had a token board system, so only me and Catherine had the token board system, and that was on our phone. And each time you increase their criterion, we were able to pick out a reinforcement. Usually mine was food, of course. And then we had data sheets. So each night we would record, we would send a screenshot to everyone, and then we would also record on the data sheet, and we record how many steps we got that day and where we were and the setting and all that kind of stuff. So we also have that. And then we also needed a computer, obviously, for Google Docs, and we use that to submit data and screenshots as well. So, yeah.
All right, so I'm going to go over experiment 1. As Bethany just said, experiment 1 was me and her. It consisted of both of us were 25 and 26. And both of our baselines, the combined average was 9,007 steps per day. We both had pretty steady baselines. So when our baselines were steady, we began our treatment. Criterion 1 started with the goal of increasing baseline by 1,000 steps. When participants met this goal in 3 out of 5 days, we would move on to the next criterion by increasing that average by 1,000 steps. Participant in this experiment, we received monetary consequence by using a token board application that we had on our iPhones. We needed to earn 3 tokens for a total of 5 days to earn reinforcement of our personal choice. As we continue on with this presentation, you will see the results of these participants.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk about group 2 during our replication. So it was 2 female participants, me and Sherry, aged 24 and 55. After obtaining a stable baseline, we set our goal to increase our steps by 1,000 or more. So when the criterion was met for 3 out of the 5 days, the participants would move to the next criterion, and each successive criterion was an increase of 1,000 steps per day over the previous goal. And as Bethany previously mentioned, neither I or Sherry received any kind of reinforcement for meeting our goals throughout the experiment.
All right, so now we're going to talk about all of our graphs. So I'll go first. So I actually had 12 days of baseline because it took me a really long time to get stable. My rates were very, very variable. And so it took me a while to get stable. You could see the last 3 days. I was able to get stable, and then I was able to move to criterion 1. So my baseline average was actually 7,306. So I knew I had to increase my steps by 1,000 to be able to be able to go on to the criterion 1. So for example, for criterion 1, I would need 8,306 because my baseline was 7,306. I took my 3 highest days out of the 5 days, and I got the average of that section, and that told me if I met the criteria, if I did not meet the criteria, and if I did meet the criteria, I knew I was able to move up. If I didn't, then I knew I had to stay exactly where I was until I did get the average of 1,000 for me to move up. So my baseline was 7,306. My criterion 1, I had to, this is just an example. Not example, but this is kind of what I based it on. My criterion 1 was 8,306. My criterion 2 would need to be 9,389. And then my criterion 3 would need to be 10,564. So you can see in the graph that that's where I had to stop because I could not get any more. I could not get above that. So that's my graph.
Okay, so my baseline consisted of only 3 days. My average baseline was 10,780 steps. Baseline consisted of just everyday normal activities. I would go to work, go to the gym, or my second job. And so those were my average steps. My criterion 1 average was 11,780. I mean, that was my goal. And my average came out to be 11,304. And criterion 1 is when we introduced the token board system, which I reinforced myself with ice cream, and I would receive 3 tokens. So criterion 1 lasted me 5 days. Criterion 2 was a little bit longer than 5 days for me. I waited until I received 3 tokens to move on to the next criterion. My criterion 2 goal was 12,304 steps, but my average is only 10,777. Criterion 3, my goal was 11,777 steps, and my average wound up to be 12,304. And that was completed in 6 days. My criterion 4 was a bit longer than all my other criterions. The goal was 13,304 steps. I was able to meet this in 9 days, and the average of my criterion 4 was 14,053 steps. As we continue on with this presentation, we'll go over the limitations as to why some of these days were longer than others.
Okay, I'll talk about my graph. My baseline took 14 days, and that's because I had variable steps. As you can see, it would go low and then go high, and it just varied with different things I was doing. We didn't have a target step amount during baseline, so we just lived our lives and ended up with whatever kind of graph we had there. Obviously, mine was not stable until towards the end. So it took 14 days, and based on my 4th highest step count for baseline, it was 4,370 steps. So for my first criterion, it was 5,370, and I met that goal in 6 days. You can see the difference in my steps for criterion 1 and criterion 2 and criterion 3, that it was much more stable. And that was because I had a goal that I could work toward. And so I was able to meet that goal each time. It took me 6 days for criterion 1, 5 days for criterion 2, and 5 days for criterion 3, with my step goals being 5470, 6470, and 7470 in those 3 criterions.
So I will talk about my graph. My baseline only lasted for 3 days, but after I entered into criterion 1, I started seeing some pretty variable counts for my steps. We have to wear our Apple Watches to collect our data, and I actually have some clients at my job that engage in some pretty challenging behaviors. So having our Apple Watches is actually something that is targeted by him. I actually got my pedometer broken because it was targeted in a crisis situation. So my graph is a little more variable than the other participants. And after entering into criterion 2, I was on an increasing trend, and I was able to move on to criterion 3, and that was as far as I could increase with my steps. But also with like having the influence of having to take off my Apple Watch so much throughout the day, kind of affected my steps maybe more than the other participants, which we will talk about later in our limitation section.
All right, so now I will talk about limitations. In the original study, there was 2 males and the rest were all females, and they were all over the age of 50. And in our study, there are only 4 females and only 1 is over the age of 50. So that was a limitation. We also found that our jobs were a huge limitation to us. Some of us struggle with the fact that we work with aggressive students. So we had to take off our watches when we would work with them, or even our pedometers that were clipped onto our pants. We got them broken, or we also had to take them off when we were working with these kids. Also, some of the activities at work will either increase or decrease our steps. So if we're working with kids when we're out in the community, some of us would automatically increase our steps by going out in the community. And some of us would either be in the home setting or in a school setting where we would have to be sitting down. So that would decrease our steps. Some of us also had other time commitments that affected our walking for the day. Some of us have second jobs that either require us to be sitting or walking around, which again, either increases or decreases our steps. Or we would have other commitments such as errands that could do either, which is increasing or decreasing steps. So an example of that would be going to the grocery store would increase your steps because you're walking up and down aisles. Or if you have a doctor's appointment, which would be considered an errand, would most likely decrease your steps. Now, even though we are all in the Eastern Standard Time, we all live in different areas, and weather played a huge effect on whether we got our steps in for the day. I live in New Jersey, so I experienced about 2 or 3 snow days where I would be stuck in my house, and Hannah and Bethany did not experience snow, so they were not limited by weather unless they had power outages or rainstorms. And then some of us also felt that our experimental group played an effect on our steps as well, because if you were reinforced with the token board system, you might have been more likely to increase your steps. Meanwhile, if you were not being reinforced with the token system, you were less likely to increase your steps because you were not being reinforced. But this group realized that taking this class was reinforcing to them, so they were able to increase their steps. Some of us also got sick while doing this study. So when you're sick, you don't get out of bed, and that's what we found to be a problem. So we did not increase our steps on those days. And then also Bethany and I in experiment 1 had pretty high baseline averages. So we found it hard to increase our steps because it was already so high. And it made it difficult for us to get higher than 10,000 steps on a daily basis. Our IOA, we collected our data on Microsoft Word. We would, time out. Can we cut this?
Oh, you're good. Keep going. You're good.
Okay. All right. Our intro observer agreement was collected for 20% of the data recording using total count IOA. Our total count IOA divides the higher number by the smaller number of our steps. Data was collected from 2 sources. We used our Apple Watch and also our pedometers. So we would compare we would divide the pedometer number by our Apple Watch number, whichever one was higher, and that would equal our IOA. Our average IOA was 96%. I averaged 95, Bethany 97, Sherry 97, and Hannah 93%.
So I'm going to talk about our treatment integrity. So we had a checklist that we made at the beginning of our experiment, and we had a couple guidelines for us to follow by. So the first one was each participant needed to charge their device every night, and so they could have it on at the very beginning of the day. They will wear their device from the moment that they wake up to when they go to bed. Each participant will wear a pedometer in addition to their Apple Watch to help us get that IOA data. The fourth checklist item was participants will take screenshots of their daily step totals on their Apple Watch, and they will record and provide a picture of the pedometer step amount that we had set up on Google Docs. Every evening, the participants would reset their step totals on the pedometer, and each participant would update their document daily with the requirement data and the screenshots that we required on our Google document. So now to talk about our conclusions and our results. This study provided evidence that reinforcement definitely increases walking in sedentary adults. The participants in group 1 were motivated by the reinforcements that they chose using their token board. I think Bethany said that she did food and Catherine did ice cream. So those were super motivating for them to increase their steps. The participants in experiment 2 were able to increase their steps without any kind of reinforcement. Technology is a very accurate way to collect step data because our technology is so advanced now. We can just look down at our wrist and see how we're doing throughout the day.
All right, so here are our references, and we posted all of them as well, and I think that's it. If you have any questions, just let us know. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.